Hi, this is Tom Needham, and you are listening to Sounds. And today we are welcoming award winning director and activist Catherine Goond to discuss her latest film, Meanwhile, a docu-poem in 6 verses that captures artists creating in the midst of chaos. Featuring an extraordinary collaboration between Jacqueline Woodson, Meshell Ndegeocello, and a cast of visionary artists, the film weaves together historical and observational footage to explore identity, race, resistance, and resilience. Rooted in the upheavals of 2020, Meanwhile uses breath as a symbol of survival and transformation, inviting viewers to immerse themselves in the creative process rather than a fixed outcome. So, thank you very much, Catherine, for joining us today on Sounds.
It's great to be here, Tom.
Yeah, first of all, congratulations. I watched the movie. This is a really special film.
Thank you very much. I love that. I love that people are getting to engage with it now. It took us so many years to make it, and it was deeply personal and deeply emotional. So I'm glad it's out in the world doing its thing.
Well, let's start with that. You said it's personal. In what way is this film personal?
Well, I have known Jacqueline Woodson, who wrote the narration, for many years, many, many years. And that goes for actually all of the artists and people who appear in the film. And it was sort of our community response to COVID, the murder of George Floyd. Uh, I have a dear friend who's in the film who was very ill with lung cancer and on an oxygen tube and has since passed. And there was just so much bearing down on all of us in isolation about these very big questions and questions of identity and questions of expectation and loss of those expectations, as well as loss of people and loss of livelihood. People were losing so much in so many different ways. And we came together after the murder of George Floyd out with such a vengeance and a new energy and a power and a brilliance. And I believe people had a whole new vision and way of understanding what we were up against and what it was going to take to fight for justice, for beauty, for the future, for something better for all of us. And that's how it became personal. These were many discussions that I'd been having with my friends in my own community for so long. And suddenly we decided to put them all onto film. And I would shoot images on my phone and send them to Jackie, and Jackie would write text. And we would edit those together and send them to Meshell, and Meshell would create a soundscape and some sounds and tunes and ideas. Um, and it was personal because it was sort of our survival. It was our way of continuing with
Mm.
vision and hope, which I think is what all the artists represent.
Tell me about the title, Meanwhile.
It was very important to us that we not just recreate trauma and violence. There is so much violence that is fed to us, just an onslaught tsunami now. Um, and particularly of Black people being mistreated and murdered and dying. And we don't need to see more of that to understand that it's wrong and to understand that we're going to have to do something to keep moving past, to get through it, to get out of this bad cycle, this bad society, this bad system, which has now come back with a vengeance. Um, and that, you know, I think we needed to also not pretend everything was okay. So Meanwhile became sort of the place in between those things. It was the place where we really do live, which is beautiful and horrible, which is exciting and full of possibility and oppressive and challenging and limiting. And we wanted to kind of look at how do we not pretend that we're going to someday be in the perfect place, and certainly not pretend that that perfect place is now, and not pretend that everything now is terrible and we're stuck here. But we have to get from one to the other. And I think that is the place we exist in, which is the meanwhile, which I love means simultaneous, but also synchronous.
Mm.
So it allows us to live in more dimensions and to imagine in more dimensions. So once we came up with the title, meanwhile, we knew that was going to be the title.
I love it. I mentioned before that this is a really special film, but I'm realizing our listeners, many of them have not seen the film yet. I
Mhm.
said in the intro that this is a docu-poem in 6 verses. I'm not sure that they're going to even be able to imagine, just from that description, what this film is. Can you try to explain to our listeners what you attempted and did successfully do in this film in terms of how
Yeah.
you structured it and what they should expect if they get a chance to see it?
I love that question and that opportunity, but it is very difficult to put it into words. And that's why I make a movie,
Yeah.
because I'm a filmmaker and I'm trying to like use images and how and the associations, putting one thing against the other. But I think it's important that people realize it's not an abstract film. I said to my mother before she saw it, because I wanted to manage her expectation, I was like, it's 90 minutes, there's no story. It's abstract. And when we walked out, the first thing she said to me was, that is not an abstract film. It doesn't have a narrative that is traditional. It's not following one character. It doesn't wrap up a story, but it has very clear experience. And I think the first thing I would say to anybody who hasn't seen the film yet is to please watch our trailer, which I don't usually love trailers, or often don't love trailers, but I feel like this trailer actually gives a very good sense of what people are going to see and what the purpose is of sort of bringing yourself for 90 minutes into this space and this opportunity and these ideas expressed this way. Um, Nobody in it tells you what to do or what to think or assumes you think anything. They're literally just being in their lives. People said at the beginning, you're going to have to come back to people more because they're going to want to know what happens. And I thought, well, Tom, you and I, we have this experience together. We may know certain things about each other going into it that we learn from seeing each other's work, or if we had looked up anything, a bio, but we don't have a whole experience that led up to this. And we won't necessarily be able to check in on each other all the time for the rest of our lives to see how things work out.
Mm.
So I think the film feels very comfortable to people, feels very daily and regular, and like an experience of just kind of being in their lives, being in the world. For the younger people, a lot of college students, I have 4 children in their 20s. For that age group, I have heard from many that they don't like thinking about COVID. I don't know that any of us do, but they don't feel equipped to revisit COVID in a healing or transformative way. That they feel like they go in their minds or in their experience or memories into the COVID time and they're just left in that nightmare. And when they watch the movie, they say, I feel like I was being so cared for. There was so much community that allowed me to then deal with some of the ways I felt, or some of the things I went through, or some of the losses I experienced. And my favorite way that somebody said that was afterwards. It was a young production assistant working in the Aubin in our nonprofit, and they came and they watched one of the final rough cuts. And I went to check on them because it had taken a while, and they were crying and crying and writing madly in their journal. And I said, "Are you okay?" And they said, "Yeah, yeah. I just didn't want the film to end because I didn't want to be alone again." So I think in that sense, without being able to describe what the film is, you spend time with different artists in their studios and people in their lives and just sort of seeing things differently. But what it really is allowing is a community of care to surround the viewer. in whatever way they want to create that.
You mentioned COVID, and I think everyone was impacted by COVID in some way. For you personally, when you say that you look back at that time, what is it specifically that was the most difficult thing for you about that period?
Oh, there was so much that was difficult. And just like the meanwhile, I would say I don't look at it as being all bad or all good. It's just, I mean, we don't have a choice, right?
Hmm.
We went through that. So to me, the isolation for many people, I think, uh, well, you asked about what was hard for me. I wasn't completely isolated because I have a big family. Um, but we were isolated from our friends, our other family, our schools, our jobs, our coworkers, our teammates. Um, and it was really raised questions, I think, about our identities. And it sort of concretized for me one of the central tenets of Meanwhile, which is that Jackie and I don't look at identity as a fixed notion. We look at identity as an experience. So, as Toni Morrison says in the film, what do you know when you know someone's race? You don't know anything because it's not what we are, it's what we bring to who we are. It's almost like the epigenetics. It's like, how did my race influence my experience of the world? And and how did my experience then translate into my relationships and into how I construct community and into how I envision the future or the better or the next? And I think when we look at it that way, it allows us a lot more mobility. And and it was in that time where it was like, oh, you would see these demonstrations. They were had people of all races and ages and genders. And there was something that was liberating, I think, for people about that, but also realizing you're sitting on these Zooms, you don't even have another body. Um, and so I think it really drove into, for better or worse, it drove people into themselves and into a very simple evaluation of self, family, community, society. And people made up or came up with very different answers to what that might be, but they did, I think, all have that experience. And that was a new experience. We can go through a lot of days without reflecting
Yeah.
on how we're acting and why we're doing what we're doing and what effect things have. And without just thinking, we don't have to think a lot of the time. And I don't think that's our best way to be
Yeah.
unthinking.
Catherine, this film is truly a collaboration. You worked with a lot of artists, but in particular, tell me about how you really worked alongside Jacqueline and Meshell. Um, they were two of the most impactful artists on the overall look and sound and feel of this film. So tell me a little bit about your collaboration.
It was wonderful to collaborate. I'm a very collaborative person and artist and filmmaker. And I think filmmakers are always collaborating with so many people. And when people bring their best to the part they're doing, we are much more likely to succeed. And I think the way I worked with Jackie and Meshell is the same way I worked with the artists and people who appear in the film, which is that we were having ongoing discussions, ongoing dialogues about all of these issues. And it just became, how can we bring the part we do to this? That's why at the end of the film, it says, a film made by Catherine Gunn, Jacqueline Woodson, Meshell Ndegeocello, Erica Dilday, and Mara Trevino. And that's because the film was made by all of us, including all the rest of the people who show up in the credits that follow that. But we were all bringing our part. So Erica was the producer, Meshell was making the soundscape, Jackie was putting words to these associations I was making, sometimes that were based on a word or a movement or a person or a theme or a sound. There's sometimes the edits, I think, allow us to really follow our minds when we don't allow that to be predetermined, or we don't allow that to be settled on by some other structure or dictation or expectation of society. And so there was incredible give and take the entire time. But to me, it reflected give and take of my entire lifetime,
Uh,
because I was going through footage that I'd filmed of my children 25 years ago,
hmm,
and finding ways. There's a photograph in there that I love, black and white photograph of one of my boys in the bathtub, just like from like his shoulders up. Do you remember this? And he's
mhm,
breathing through a
yeah,
paper towel tube.
yeah.
And he's just taken this paper towel tube with him into the bathtub. His dreadlocks are all around his head like a sun. And he's laying under the water, breathing through this tube. And, to me, it's like one of my friends said the film is like a hologram, like any scene or shot represents the whole film. And I kind of love that. You can pick a
Mm,
character, or you can pick up an image or a line someone says. And in that same way, it was like, oh, there we are, figuring out ways to breathe that are creative, figuring out ways. He was figuring out a way to be in the world. He was maybe underwater. He was maybe with his eyes closed. He was maybe alone in the bathtub, although he wasn't, because I took that photograph. But you know what I mean? It really, to me, that is how it all came together, was kind of letting ourselves be as expansive as we are. And I still don't think it's nearly as expansive as any of us could be when given the true opportunity to express ourselves.
yeah. On this show, we use the term soundtrack, film composers.
Mhm.
We play a lot of music on the show. But I noticed that in the promotion for the film, and even when you're talking about it, you used the term soundscope.
Mhm.
Um, can you explain to our listeners why you're using that term and what it means?
Well, Meshell Ndegeocello these days has been tapped to do many, many um, soundtracks for movies and TV shows. And people send her a finished project and they say, please make the music for it. And she has fun and she does a great job, but she really welcomed the opportunity this time to influence what was in a scene, or how the film was edited, or how it was made, like what it meant. And from the beginning, so that the soundscape, we say, because she's bringing in different kinds of sounds, some silence, some quiet, sometimes a voice, but it has to do, there's like traffic, and there's it's not a song um, that goes under there. It's an embellishment, it's an extension, it's some way that, the way we cut a scene with a traffic image would be based on her sounds and her soundscape, instead of going to her and saying, here's a finished film, now please make the music. So in that sense, we're clear it's not a soundtrack, although it certainly stands alone as beautiful
Hmm.
sound. I mean, and also the way she worked with me was that I would send her scenes or cuts, or sort of even sometimes just when I had started by assembling, like we just call it an assembly. You get some footage, you put it in order. It's not edited yet. It's just saying this is the material we're working with. And I would send those, and she and Jebin and her band would go into the studio and just start recording. So they weren't making a 3-minute, 12-second song for a 3-minute, 12-second scene. They would then record, I'd send her 25 minutes of footage. and audio, and I'd get back, 45 minutes or an hour of a variety of sounds and music and instrumentation. And then we would work some of that in and send it back. Sometimes we put things in places she hadn't associated them with. So I'd send something, she'd send that back, and then we'd be cutting another scene. And I think that those sounds, those instruments, that music at that point might work well here because it's saying the same thing we're trying to do in this scene. It was interesting because they all made great music for certain of the artists. That was interesting too. Like it seemed that some of the artists inspired a certain thinking among them, and then we'd use that at different parts of the film. Does that answer the question?
That does. I was just like sitting back and listening to this because it's very unique, and I love it. And I think our fans are going to really find this film, just great for that aspect that you just described. I know we don't have too much more time. One of the things that I love about this film as well is you said earlier the film is not abstract, but it is completely unlike any other film I've ever seen. And I think it's just one of those films where you just have to sit down and take in the sounds, take in the images, listen to the words. You bring in all these different ideas, and it just creates a unique viewing experience, unlike anything else. And I think that's what's really needed today because I think so many people are just watching tons and tons of movies, and even people who are not experts just get very used to the structure that they've been trained to expect in a film. And I was just wondering, as you show it to audiences, what are people saying after they've sat through this unique experience, and what can people expect who haven't seen the film yet that might want to go out and check this out?
I think people are saying very similar things to what you're saying. It's hard to put into words, but people are appreciating it in a very deep way that is incredibly satisfying and exciting to all of us. That, it's not just us sitting there sort of spinning our wheels, but we've been able to layer an experience for people that is about experience.
Hmm.
And so I think it gives people words, it gives them confidence, it gives them comfort. Um, there was a beautiful review in the Brooklyn Rail where she said in these volatile days that this film feels like it was staunching a bleed. And I mean, I love that. I love
Yeah.
that idea that it is providing any kind of solace and motivation to keep looking at the parts about resistance and resilience. We say that, if people pin us down and say, what's it about? We're like racism, resistance, and resilience. And I think the second two parts are important. I think people will try to say race. Maybe they'll say race and racism, but I don't think those things exist without resistance. You're never going to see or hear any real explanation or exploration into race and racism that doesn't involve resistance and that isn't reliant on resilience. So if we can help ourselves and each other identify that kind of resilience and find it in ourselves, and give ourselves the ability to resist, then I think we're all being artists. We're all trying to create something new, which is not this.
Absolutely.
It opens at DCTV, the Firehouse in Chinatown in New York, on
Okay.
Friday. It'll be there for a week. Then we're going to the Laemmle Royale in LA for a week. Um, and we have a lot of other screenings. There are tons of universities and museums that are taking it on. A couple other festivals, although we did most of our festivals, I think, last year. But if people go to meanwhilefilm.com, we're trying to keep the screening list updated and people can find information there. The trailer is available online, and eventually, presumably, it'll be available to stream.
Well, I want to highly recommend it to everyone. And Catherine, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you. I love this movie. Everyone,
Mm.
please check out Meanwhile. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate hearing how you feel about the film.